Welcome to the Property Podcast, the home of news and debate about building long-term wealth from property investment for beginners and experts alike. And now for your hosts. They may not be as cool as me, but they do know their property. It's Rob and Rob.
Welcome to the Property Podcast, the new podcast for property investors, new or experienced. This podcast is for everybody who has an interest in property investments. Today I'm joined by my co-host, Rob Dix. Rob,
hello.
Good to have you today.
Thanks very much. Good to be here.
Rob, before I start, you better explain where you are today because we're not together.
We are not. I am in Ao Nang in southern Thailand at the moment, where it is about 35 degrees outside, but I wouldn't feel too jealous because I've been stuck inside trying to find a plumber to sort out a block bath all afternoon. So, yeah, same problems, different location. But yeah, I'm a long way from London at the moment.
Yeah, well, I'm in London. We're not quite at the same temperature, and it's a bit grey outside, but I'm not jealous whatsoever.
Glad to hear it.
We'll explain why in a bit, why you are where you are. But let's go into what we've got coming up in this episode. We've got a brief introduction to ourselves. Don't worry, we're not going to do this every week. This is not to serve our egos. It's just to let you know who you're listening to and why you're listening to them. And we're going to have a look at what's in the news and what's caught our attention this week. We're going to cover our main topic, which is why property can change your life for the better. So we're going to have a look at that. And we're also going to offer you a resource of the week, something that we feel that will be able to benefit you as a property investor. Now, I think it's important to point out here that this podcast is going to be ongoing and we'd really, really love your support. So one of the ways you can do that is through iTunes. Now, this is available through the iTunes store. It's free to download. But if you can give us 5-star reviews, it'll really help this podcast gain momentum and we'd really, really appreciate it. So if you could go to the iTunes store, go to the podcast section and look for the Property Podcast and leave a review, we'd be really, really grateful. And of course, anybody who's kind enough to give us a review, we'll read it out in our future episodes.
Yeah, and it's particularly important at the moment because we want to hit the new and noteworthy section, which will give us more exposure on iTunes. And I think we've got 6 weeks from when the podcast starts, so the clock is ticking. So reviews now really count.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Really appreciate your support because this podcast is for property investors. Happy to give our time every week. So let's get news and information out there. Let's get the support. And in the first 6 weeks, if we can get in a new and noteworthy section, that's going to be a massive, massive help. So we'd really appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. So shall we start with talking about ourselves?
Yeah, this is one of my favourite subjects. So I'm Rob Bentz. To make things easy, we're both called Rob. I'm Rob Bentz. I've got the slightly northern accent, as you may have already picked up, and Rob's a little more refined than myself. I run a property company called RMP Property. That's rmpproperty.com. It's a property company for new investors or people with experience who really want to get back on track with their property investment or get started. We look at where they're at and where they're trying to get to and help them put a plan together, and then we'll find properties that match their needs. I'm also a property investor. So I've been in property investment for 7 years and I've also worked in the property investment industry for the last 8 years. So I've seen a lot. I've been through the credit crunch, which was fun. So I've been there during the booms. I've been there during the blow up and I've sort of come out the other side. So it's been an interesting 8 years. On the side of that, when I'm not doing all things property, I'm a bit of a venture junkie. So from mountain climbing to marathon running, you name it, I'm interested. If it seems like my heart rate's going to get up a little and it's going to get the adrenaline going. So that's myself. Rob, do you want to give a bit of background and maybe explain why you're halfway across the world?
Yeah, I will do. So I'm a property investor in London and Liverpool, and I blog about property at propertygeek.net, where I've also got my own podcast, Property Geek Podcast, where we did the first series last year. I'll be starting the next one soon. I'm also working on a book about property investors, so all very geeky indeed on the subject of property, just because it's something that's fascinated me long before I got involved myself. And that geekery crosses over into my day job as well, which is running a web design and copywriting business called Mortified Cow. I run that with my wife, and as you mentioned, we do it while we travel around a lot because we've got the kind of jobs where really as long as we've got an internet connection, we can work. We figured we might as well take advantage of that. So for the last year or so, we've been working while we travel around the world. And bizarrely, we don't have a home of our own at the moment, despite having these other houses. And so we have to arrange short-term lets when we're back in London, which is weird. And there are pros and cons to being on the move so much. And we might talk about property investing from a distance in another episode, maybe, because it's always an interesting subject. But
Definitely.
on the whole, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it definitely sounds it. And I know I'm probably not going to be the only one who gets occasionally jealous of when we talk about where you are and what you're doing. But you should definitely check out some of Rob's websites, because not only is there great content in there, they look fantastic. Okay, so let's have a look at what's caught our attention this week, Rob, in the news, or in this case, on a website called Property Tribes. Now, before we jump into the story and why it's caught our attention, if you're new to property investment, one of the first websites you need to get yourself onto, other than our own, is propertytribes.com. It's a great community full of experienced and newbie investors who are sharing the knowledge for free. A great website, some interesting topics going on there. Well worth a look and have a bit of a dip into some of the content and see what they've got for you.
Definitely. I think that the main thing about Property Tribes is it's not only supportive, but it's not moderated with a heavy hand, but it kind of self-moderates. And so you're not going to find anyone like trying to sell you dodgy deals or anyone trying to give out dodgy information. It's a place where you can ask questions as a newbie, but also as someone more experienced, you can always pick up something new. It's a site that I log on to every day.
Definitely. I must agree. It's nice not to see, which you do see on some of the websites, the hard sell not happening.
Yeah.
So as soon as someone new to property posts in there, they're not suddenly attacked by 20 different people trying to sell them their killer product. So
absolutely.
Yeah, that is a good point. Okay. The blog we've picked out today is buy-to-let morally wrong? Do you want to pick this up, Rob, and talk about why you were interested in this one?
Yeah, it's one of those topics where it's easy to kind of look at it and go, oh, it's a housing crisis. Lots of people are forced to rent, and there are all these people who own tens or hundreds of houses. This is wrong. They're keeping everything to themselves. But the reality, I think, as we all know, is a lot more complex like that. And I think Kevin Wright made a really interesting point on the thread, which is that if there are residential buyers in the market, they've got a double advantage over investors, because they can get a higher loan to value and they'll be willing to pay a higher price normally, because they've got a different set of incentives from someone who's buying as an investment. So it's not like greedy investors are hoovering up all the houses. It's just that investors are the only people who are in a position to buy at the moment. And once they've bought, they provide a service. They provide somewhere for people to live. As long as they do it properly, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, and I think it's as long as people do it properly, that's the key point there.
Yeah.
Now, people are going to expect us to pick the side that we have. Of course they are, but I think Vanessa, in the first original post, she makes a few points, but I think it really hits the nail on the head. Where are other people who rent privately going to live if there are no landlords? If people offer a service and it's a good service, then you should feel proud of what you do, because you're helping people meet one of their basic needs, which is shelter. So if you're a good landlord and you offer them good property and you're fair, then you should be proud of what you're doing, because you're helping people out. Just like a business owner should be proud when they employ people, because they're giving people jobs. It's the same with investors. You should be proud that you're giving people a good place to live. Read the article. It's really good. It goes on, a lot of contribution there. We'll link to it in the show notes as well, so you can find it easily, which is in the propertypodcast.com. So if you go to the propertypodcast.com, there'll be show notes there, including this blog and post on Property Tribes. Okay, let's get into our topic of the week. The topic of the week is why property investment can change your life. Now, it's a pretty big title for our first episode, but I think it's important because so many subjects we're going to cover over the coming weeks, but let's have a look at the main reasons why we're even here in the first place. Why are we doing property investment? Yes, it can be fun. People enjoy investments and so on, but actually there's bigger reasons, and that's what we're going to look at. So, Rob, do you want to take us through the first point that you've put down?
Yeah, well, we've tried to break this down into different areas, haven't we? And the first one that obviously springs to mind is that it can give you financial freedom. And the definition of financial freedom that I think appears in Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which is a book that a lot of property investors made a big difference to their lives when they started, is that it's the point at which your monthly passive income exceeds the amount of money you need to live each month. So if you've got the point where you're renting out some properties and the rental profits after all expenses is more than you need for your own family to live on, and maybe you've got your properties fully managed as well, then that's freedom. You've got as much money coming in as you need, and you've freed up a lot of time to do whatever you want to do. And even if you're managing 3 big HMOs on your own, you can still do that in less than a 40-hour work week. So once you've got to that point, you just have to systemize what you do, get someone else to do it, and then get on with what you want to be doing. And obviously it's easier said than done, but I would argue that you can become financially free with property faster than you can with any other type of investment, assuming that you take a sensible level of risk.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if you ask most people, why they're getting into property, they might use different terms, but ultimately the majority of people are going to mention financial freedom. So yeah, it's definitely why that's point number one.
Yep.
Point number two sort of follows on from that. Not only can you set yourself up and give yourself choices and financial freedom, but number two is set future generations up, because you can leave a legacy by building a portfolio. Now, most pensions, if that's your choice of future savings, once you die, that's it. It ends if you've bought an annuity. But by investing in property, you can pass something on to future generations and give you peace of mind that you're not just setting something for yourself up, but you're helping out whoever way, maybe a direct descendant, sons, daughters, or nieces, nephews, whoever. You're doing something that's not selfish. You're helping other people. You're helping future generations. And if you're wise, you'll educate them on what you've done. So not only can they benefit from what you've done, but expand on it. So that's another great benefit from investing in property and how it can change your life.
Definitely. I was talking to an investor for my book recently, and he's getting to the point now where he's talking about sort of succession planning, he called it, and it's ways of figuring out not just the most tax efficient way of passing things on, which is something I'm sure you know a lot more about than I do, but also sort of making them realize the benefit of it, so they don't just inherit all this stuff and immediately sell it off because they don't know what to do. But it is a great way of setting up your family for generations to come, definitely. Okay, so the next point is that you can get better returns than the banks. And that's obviously not a difficult thing to do at the moment. But I think the reason why you always get a better return than the banks is because of leverage. Like most of the time, you're going to be using a mortgage for, say, 60, 75% of the purchase price. So that means even if your net yield is only, say, 4 or 5%, and you'd hope it'd be higher, but if it was that, then your actual return on cash invested is going to be higher because you've borrowed a lot of the money you used to buy the property. And there aren't many other asset classes where you're going to get people lending you money so you can multiply your returns in that way. But even if you don't take on a mortgage, most of the time you're still going to be getting a better return than you would by just keeping it in the bank or under your mattress.
Definitely. And I think return on investment, ROI, is a big point there, and it's something we'll probably discuss in a future podcast, because being able to calculate ROI doesn't just allow you to assess different properties, but also property against other investments. So it's definitely something we'll come back to.
Yeah.
Okay, shorter lifetime changes. So we've talked about the long-term financial future for yourself through property, but shorter term, you can also benefit as well. Now, these aren't such radical changes, but because property in this current market can give you really good returns from really good cash flow, little things can happen if you choose them. You don't have to. Now, for some people, it may be that their extra cash flow they're generating in the shorter term might allow them to hire a cleaner, or go away on short weekend breaks, or go out to eat a little more regularly than they used to. Now, this is not to say that you should throw away all your profits and never reinvest them, but it's also something worthwhile taking on to say that enjoy your work as well. So maybe reinvest the majority of the money you're making from your property, but if you're finding you're spending 6 hours a week cleaning your home, then a cleaner might actually make quite a big difference to your life. I know it sounds silly, but actually that's a fair step of making these lifestyle changes, because it's valuing your time and saying, okay, actually I'm making this from my property. I can save those 6 hours by paying a cleaner to come in once a week, and that's going to make a big difference to my life. That can free up so much time for you, then all the better. So that's just one small example, but property can make changes in your life pretty early on. Yes, wealth and big money comes further down the line, but short term you can have some benefits too. Yeah,
it's a great point. I think we can easily get caught up in the big picture and forget that you need to see some of the fruit of your labor along the way, because that's what's going to give you the motivation to keep going and realize, I'm onto a good thing here. And if you can use that, like in your example of like freeing up some of your time to produce more wealth for yourself, then all the better. Then the next point is that as well as helping yourself, you can help others through your property investment by being a good landlord. And that's something that we touched on earlier when we talked about like you have to run your property like a business, and you can't just look at the numbers. You have to look at the people as well. And yeah, I get a real kick out of providing a service. I love it when I speak to my tenants and they tell me stories about their friends who sort of been trying for 3 months to get the shower fixed and stuff like that, or the heating doesn't work, and they sort of realise how lucky they are that they're not in that situation. But I really enjoy it, and it's just a case of treating other people as you'd want to be treated yourself. And my view is that for everyone who's in one of my properties, that's someone who's not going to have the pain and the hassle of dealing with a landlord who doesn't care about them and doesn't do their job properly. So it's a wider good as well as a personal good.
Yeah, and I think what people are going to find out as these episodes go on, that we both have a slightly different approach to how we manage our properties, and I think it's going to make for some interesting talking topics. I won't go into too much now, but I think the common ground that we've got is that being a good landlord is important. Now, whether you're more hands-on or hands-off, even if you're hands-off, you take the hands-off approach, you still make sure you look after your tenants by making any fixes that are needed done quickly, charging a fair rent, and just general good behaviour. And I think, again, there's another topic for us to maybe debate on and talk about in a future episode, which I think will make interesting listening. So how can property change your life? Well, actually, it gives you business experience. Now, a lot of people I talk to on a daily basis are business owners already who invest in property. And if they're not, a lot of people actually say they would like to. Now, property investment is an ideal way of learning some business disciplines. Now, the last thing you should be doing when you go into property is just running in, buying blind and hoping it all works out. You should be putting plans together like you would a business, setting out targets like you would a business, and then operating your property like a business again. Now, it doesn't mean you have to be working 40, 50 hours a week on your property investment. Far from it. You set up systems, and this is all the experience you will learn from running a successful property portfolio. And by gaining that experience, if you then wanted to move on and start a business, then you've got the ideal foundation and knowledge from running your property portfolio. There's so many lessons you can learn, and we'll talk about them in coming weeks, but the business experience you can learn, and you should implement as well, business disciplines into your portfolio, is huge. So I think that's a point that's not talked about. It's a big plus point.
Well, we're going to talk about it because we're going to bore everyone silly with our love of systems and everything else, and so that's going to come through in future episodes, I'm sure.
Yeah, we'll give you plenty of notice when the systems episode's coming up, so you can give yourself a free week. Okay, what else have you got for us, Rob?
Okay, so point number 7 is that you get to meet like-minded individuals. And that's something that I hadn't really thought about before I got started in property. But then I got so interested in the people who are involved in property that I've started writing a book about it. Because people who invest in property tend to be very interesting people because they've done something that most people will never do. Like, despite all their mates down the pub telling them the horror stories about the things that will go wrong when you try and invest in property, they've done their research, they've taken a risk, and they're reaping the reward for doing something a bit different. Also, I think people in property tend to be very success-minded, that they're looking for reasons why and not reasons why not. And because of that, maybe, they're very positive and they're very generous with their knowledge. Now, on the social side, you could easily fill your entire calendar with networking events, and you could spend all day on Twitter and all the Facebook groups. And there are people who I'm pretty sure do spend all day on Twitter and the Facebook groups. But even if all you do is make a couple of friends who you have coffee with every month and talk about property and business and life, you're guaranteed to have some interesting conversations. And a lot of the time, you might superficially have nothing in common with these people and meet people who never come into contact otherwise. But because you've got a similar outlook on life and what you're trying to achieve, you're guaranteed to find it interesting.
Well, a prime example is we found each other through, sounds like a dating website, we found each other. We met each other through property investment. If we didn't have that common ground initially, then this podcast wouldn't have taken off. And it's such an important point, that meeting like-minded people, because property at the very beginning, as you explained, if you start talking about down a pub, 9 times out of 10 people are going to think you're crazy, and you're a bit weird and out there. So by finding other people who have those same belief systems as yourself, it suddenly makes you feel a lot better and gives you more confidence to go forward. So it's definitely a big plus of property investment.
Yeah.
Okay, and last one, and we put this last because often people will talk about this first and make it sound a lot easier than it is. But we've left it last because it's not as easy as people make out, and that's create huge wealth. Now, you can make a lot of money from property, but this is not get rich quick. I'm sorry if people were tuning into this podcast hoping that we're going to start giving you quick get rich quick secrets, because if we knew them, we'd just be implementing them every day. Property can be get rich slowly, and huge wealth can be made through property investment if you're prepared to take that long-term view. And we'll talk about some strategies that you can implement in the coming weeks, but it is possible. Although normally people talk about the wealth and riches you can make through property as the first thing they'll ever talk about, yes, it is possible, but we've put it last because it sort of comes at the end. There's lots that comes before it. So it's possible, but it takes time, it takes effort, and putting systems and plans in place as well.
Yeah. You said earlier that you've been doing this pre-crash and through the crunch and still doing it now. And I've got a bit of a different perspective because I bought my own house in 2006, I think it was, but I didn't start buying for investment until we'd come out the other side and all the kind of loopholes that people were using in a get rich quick kind of way had been closed up. So I never really saw that side of it. For me, it's always been like, I'll do all this now and I'll make a little bit of money every month and then eventually everything will be great. But it seems like that's kind of how things always used to be and how things are now. But then there's this weird period in the middle where you could kind of do really bonkers things very quickly. And I think a lot of the people who are trying to tell you can get rich quick now are still trying to kind of flog the ideas that worked for a couple of years back in the mid-2000s, but now just do not apply anymore.
Yeah, that's such a good point. You see it on the internet, and I'm glad to say it's less, but unfortunately it's still there, that people do tout property as a get-rich-quick mechanism. Now, if these people knew how to get rich quick through property, why aren't they just implementing it themselves? Why are they selling you the knowledge? If it's that easy to make money really quickly through property and suddenly become a millionaire overnight, then just keep making your millions overnight. You don't need to sell me a £2,000 course.
Yeah.
So it sounds really obvious, but so many people go on them. They're obviously very good at marketing.
That's a whole episode in itself, at least.
Yeah, you could feel the passion in my voice coming through there. Something I'm definitely got a few opinions on. Okay, so that's our topic of the week, why property investment can change your life. I hope you found that useful. We're going to expand on a lot of those points over time. But if there's anything in particular you'd like us to cover, we'd love to hear from you. Jump on the website. There's a few ways you can leave us feedback, but go to thepropertypodcast.com. Jump on there, leave us your feedback, any questions or anything you'd like to cover in future weeks, please do let us know. Okay, so let's have a look at our resource of the week. That's our resource of the week. So this week, we're starting with a book. So we're going to recommend a book to you that you should read. Now, when we put the notes together for the show, I gave Rob the title of this book and he hadn't actually read it. It's called The Richest Man in Babylon.
Yeah, it's a book that it's always Rich Dad Poor Dad and The Richest Man in Babylon are always the two books that seem to come up and when people talk about what kind of gave them the inspiration to get started in property. And I've never got around to reading it, so I'm hoping you can tell me now why I should go and order it on Amazon straight away.
Well, the first reason is it's a quick read. No, I'm joking. And the Richest Man in Babylon, I think, actually should be the first book people buy if they haven't got into property investment, even though it doesn't talk about property at all. Now, Rich Dad Poor Dad is fantastic. Many people refer to it as like the property Bible, and so many people talk about how it's changed their life, and that's fine. It's a great book, and I'm sure we'll recommend it in weeks to come and even talk about it. But The Richest Man in Babylon talks about financial discipline, and it's a great book because it's a story of parables and based on Babylonian times, years gone by, and it's really well put together. It's a quick read and it makes a lot of sense as you go through it. But the reason why I like it, it's so common sense, the principles that are given in the book. But sometimes because they're so simple, we overlook them. So it's about saving, the most effective ways to save, how to create wealth. So many little nuggets of gold throughout the book that actually, if you read it, there'll be nothing in there that you don't know already. But sometimes you just need to be told it again. And when you read it, because it's put together so well, that I think you'll get a lot of value from it. It's a book I always recommend to our investors who contact me and the team here. We always talk about The Richest Man in Babylon and Rich Dad Poor Dad. But if they're completely new to property, we always start them on this one first, because it's about learning those disciplines. Because if you don't have financial discipline, then you're going to fail in property.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? But it's true that the books that have the biggest impact on me are often the ones that don't tell me anything new at all. They just tell me stuff that I already knew deep down, but I just never thought about in that way before. And that often makes far more of an impact than books that are full of real hands-on stuff and technical detail. So yeah, I can totally see why that would be a great place to start and get the right mindset. And if you get the mindset right, then it makes everything else a hell of a lot easier.
Definitely. I mean, that's the genius of the author, is that he took some really simple principles and put them together in a way that creates a lot of impact. So, great book. If you haven't read it yet and you're new to property investment, go and buy The Richest Man in Babylon. We'll link to it in the show notes, but it's a cheap book to buy, quick read, and I think it'll offer you a lot of value. So go and read that book. Okay. Well, I think that's us today, Rob. We're close to covering everything we wanted to talk over today. How have you found it?
And
coming back next week?
I think so. I'm literally coming back. I'm going to be back with you in London next week. But I feel like, in the course of doing this, we've come up with about 10 other topics that we want to talk about in more detail. We've had to rein ourselves in a little bit. So there's plenty more episodes where this came from, I reckon.
Perfect. No, agree. Okay. Thank you for listening. We just ask once again, if you've enjoyed this and you'd like more episodes to come out, we're really happy to put them out there. We just need your support. So if you can go on iTunes, leave a review. We'll read them out in weeks to come. We appreciate your support, so we won't let it go unnoticed. Have a look. Let's try and get in a new and noteworthy section of iTunes. And also jump on the website, the Property Podcast, and leave any comments or questions you have. And if you want to subscribe to the podcast, you can do so through the website too. But thank you so much for listening to our first podcast. We hope it's the first of many.
I hope so. Good stuff, Rob. We'll see you next week.
Super. Thanks, Rob.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Property Podcast. Don't forget to check out the show notes and join the mailing list at thepropertypodcast.com.